type stuff. Hi, I'm host Eric, host Talking with Famous People. We're here tonight. Bo suggested a very interesting topic, which is generation gap. It's something that seems particularly interesting to me because, as I mentioned on an earlier episode, my ex-wife joked the other night at dinner. She said to me, "Don't you have any friends your own age?" And
Wait, really?
yeah,
That's
uh,
pretty funny.
I'm like, "Yes, come on, hey." But it's because I guess she noted that a lot of young people and I talk on Talking with Famous People. I have young people, real life friends, like David Dosh came over the other night, I guess it was last night, and made some videos with me, fellow ENTP. And of course, I do have a lot, most of my real life friends are my own age, but people my age, they're a lot less active socially in general than I would like to be. And I don't, even if I were active though, I don't want to go out and go to parties or go to nightclubs or go to bars or something like that. I'm too old for that. I'm not interested in that. So this ends up being a nice for me to engage socially. So this generation gap issue is interesting to me as well because I don't find myself differing from young people politically because of a generational thing necessarily, or I don't find myself differing from them uh, as human beings because of a generational thing. But I do find myself differing from them in terms of certain media habits, perhaps, and knowledge of technology in particular. There are certain things that they seem to all know about that I don't really know about, and certain things that they seem to appreciate that I don't understand why anybody would appreciate that, and other stuff like that. So I'm interested in your guys' thoughts on this generation gap question. Bo, since you suggested the topic, you want to go next?
I think each cohort has its own profile of important people and important events that happen that shape their generation. Like my generation, I think 9/11 was very instrumental in our value forming and how we relate to the state opposed because I became very rebellious against all this pro terrorism I forgot what it's called, Patriot Act stuff, and that changed my entire world. Without that in my life, I would have been a completely different person.
Hmm. Yeah, that's, I
So
definitely think that as 9/11's a big thing with our generation. Are we considered? How old are you, Bo?
I'm in between millennial and Generation Z.
So what's
Or
Are we Generation Z? What
how
what?
old are you? I'm
I'm
the
19.
very end of millennial.
What did that make
What
you?
what
How
is
old
what is
are you?
millennial?
Huh? I'm 21.
Uh,
I would probably be in the same boat than I think. What is millennial? Is that someone who grew up during 2000s?
The 90s.
I think I would. I was born in '97, so does that make me a millennial or Generation Z?
Z
Probably late
probably.
millennial.
I'd say Z.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's whenever people
You're on
want
the
it to be.
border.
It goes by seasons.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I'm
But yeah, I
Generation
think
X.
Generation X.
Mhm.
See, my friend, I wasn't really in an argument with him, but I was discussing. He thinks that millennials are the people who were like 20 years old when the millennia hit, and I was just like, I'm not sure that's right. And he's just like, no, yeah, that is right. And I was just like, well, then what are we then? And he's like, I think he said Generation Z or something, but
It's because there are periods of crisis and periods of awakening which shift back and forth between every 40 years or so, so that whenever a big war is coming up, a crisis forms and that catalyzes the efforts for unification under a certain ideal, and that becomes a civic generation. So millennials are a civic generation because of our entire global terrorism and uh, environmentalism crisis. So that
I
solidified a
can
certain
think of
ideal
plenty
within
of
us.
examples of
And
civilizations that don't follow that rule you just proposed.
how so?
Well, I mean, there's lots of civilizations that have not followed that rule. Look at China, that had periods of hundreds of years of relatively little or no war, or war that didn't impact most of the population. That
I
would
think that's because and their culture didn't expand much, did it?
Well, no, but what I'm saying is the fact that the generations may follow this rule for a couple of times in the 20th century and the 19th century doesn't make it a rule that we can anticipate will be repeated. As technology
I think it's
improves, things
actually a more
change.
European-centered thing. It goes back all the way back to ancient Rome and a lot of their traditions of the seasons.
Okay, well, fine. I'm not saying that there's not elements, good analysis in that perspective of things. What I'm saying, if you're a civic, like, I think that the generational differences uh, play out differently in a post-internet world than they did in a pre-internet world because,
I
like,
think so too.
we're able to communicate directly with one another in ways that people wouldn't
I think the
probably
next spiritual
communicate.
awakening is going to be the catalyst for the transhumanist awakening.
And what happens then? We all get sprout wings.
We biodiversify.
I mean, we get to have dogs as arms and cats as feet.
We can biogenetically enhance our entire species. We
Well,
can
that's what I
excel at
want.
an accelerated
I want dog arms and cat feet.
rate.
And for instead of feet, I want large cats that walk around. So I just have to stand still, and my cat feet walk for me.
I mean, the ethical and moral implications about what we consider like important in life itself, like those divides have to be made somewhere, and those ethics have to be drawn some between the distinctions of our values. And if we don't form those distinctions, we just are oblivious to it, and it's going to hit us like a brick.
What distinctions do you think we need
I
to
think that's an
form?
interesting analysis.
What distinctions do you think we need to form?
Like, is life sacred, or is life invaluable, or is life recyclable? Is death an important thing to factor into our morality? And death becomes a very important concept if you're working with Darwinianism, because that's the very factor that drives Darwinian theory, is that each species die so they can replicate a new batch that best survives, so that the best only survive. That is a essential element of classism that we have to arrange within our society to accept or to go in a different direction.
But that
Do you
doesn't
think that
justify
these
moral crimes.
the
Go ahead, Zach. Sorry.
well, that's fine. Do you think, Bo, that the new moral implications, ethical implications we have that are arising now with transhumanist stuff like that, do you think that is something that has occurred as a result of living in like a post-God world with Nietzschean philosophy?
Definitely, I think it's our trying to recreate that within ourselves, that immortality wish.
Hmm. That's a really interesting way to look at it.
And I think it's very idealistic. I don't think it's going to go very like. It's gonna like go places, but I don't think it's going to become such a dominant part of our ideology that we decide to change our entire like species just to fit that stereotype. I think we should be trying to build reactions against it and trying to temper in certain like enhancements at different periods of time so that we can gradually get the species to be I mean, all gonna die eventually, so I think we should just try and perpetuate the best species we can going forward.
Hmm.
That sounds like an argument in favor of eugenics, though. I mean, my position is
I'm very
my position is that humanity advances first intellectually and morally. That the reason people get upset now because when cops shoot black people is because there's been an advancement in human moral understanding. It's come from the ability of people to see what that crime actually looks like, to feel and express outrage about it. And it's changed the way that society views police shootings now. I think that that's how society changes. It changes one issue at a time. It changes when one issue loses the fight, it loses the argument, and it changes when the consensus changes. So from my perspective, it's a matter of uh, dissembling the government the problem parts of the government one at a time in the same fashion. We may not necessarily immediately get legislative satisfaction, but we know it's going to be more difficult now for governments to pass laws that protect police officers from accountability. That's why one of the reasons why I lament so much the recent shootings of police officers, right? Is that it tilts it back in that favor again, where it says um, police officers now have good reason to be held to different standards because there's a war on cops. There's open season on cops. Yada yada yada.
Well, it kind of like is now if you look at the shit going on in the recent news. I mean, shit's going down. Like a lot of cops are getting shot, and I imagine a lot of blacks are still getting shot too. Things have gotten so much worse. Like things have escalated to such a draconian phase now, where it's each side thinks they have the moral high ground. You know, where it's just ideological warfare at this point.
Yeah, we're very steep in within culture wars too, so that there are like a growing divide between what each party believes and how they spread those values to their children. Because I don't necessarily believe these things are a generational gap, but a gap between differing factions that take sides within the dialectic, so that you have to pass a value to begin with. I mean, in the Civil War period, there are a lot of like dividing families around around those values, but I don't think we have the same kind of thing in this culture war. I think this culture war is about what you inherently think is moral.
Okay,
And
but here's
I
the
think
thing: you guys
a lot of the
probably
older
don't.
people are going to are a lot of the church folk who want our old culture are going to say that life is sacred and that we shouldn't change our form at all.
Okay, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of resistance about that because at the end of the day, the issue will come down to individuals making decisions for themselves, and that'll be the issue. What I'm saying is,
When the individual dies, when that God finally goes away, what happens afterwards?
well, until we
I
solve
think like
that,
what happens afterwards is with the realization that I think a lot of that stuff is left over from. I think the Nietzsche stuff is very important to bring up because once you remove any concept of any any meaningful framework of God, then the next thing to inherit that moral agency is something like a state, and you abolish that, and it's just going to turn into like Bo said, like some sort of dialectic where each faction inherits the moral legitimacy, you know, and that's where the ideological warfare comes into. I think that a lot of the ideas that life is sacred, that we have a metaphysical aspect of us that's going to exist beyond our life, is really just echoes of past traditions that no longer are meaningful in a modern world, and that with the significance of that, I think is going to come with eugenics and stuff like that.
well, number one, I think that you guys are thinking about this culture war notion incorrectly insofar as you're forgetting to compare it to the alternative, the correct alternative, the way it was before, when nobody fucking cared. When the default was, well, of course cops are perfectly nice people who never
Never
intentionally
going back.
shoot people. Huh? Yeah, we're never
We're
going
never
back to
going
that.
back.
We're never going back to it. It's progress. You guys are viewing the culture war as though there's some sort of threatening menace to it. It's
I don't think we're saying
progress.
it's necessarily in like not progress. I think we're just kind of observing the happenings of it, right? Or the effects that it'll ultimately bring.
Well, see, I find it encouraging though, not discouraging. I think there's a notion that these disagreements are boding ill for civilization, but I'd say they bode well to the extent that we're actually talking about it. To the extent that cops are getting shot and black people are still getting shot, that's a bad thing. I don't. Remember that somebody's going to shoot cops because they shoot black people. Shoot the cops who shoot the black people. Don't shoot random cops. Right? Shoot
I mean, I I agree with that sentiment, but I don't want to advocate any sort of murder of anyone, so I am just going to say that.
All right, me neither. I'm not saying that you should do that. I'm saying if somebody is going to try to claim any justification for shooting cops, they better be shooting the actual cops who murdered somebody and got away with it. Then they've got some sort of moral case. I'm not saying they should do that. I would not rule in favor of them as a vigilante in that situation. That's why I believe the state should have a monopoly on use of force. And they have a responsibility to use it correctly, which means holding cops accountable for the murders they commit. But my point is not to encourage people to shoot any cops, including those guilty of murder, but rather to point out that you have zero claim to moral legitimacy when you are shooting random cops who had nothing to do with those specific black people getting killed by those other specific cops. Anyway.
But it's sort of like a I mean, I agree with that assessment, definitely. I think that the ones who are, shooting cops, stuff like that, I think it comes from a sort of I'm going to go back to the ideological warfare, because in their head it is justified. I mean, this is like the oppressed versus the oppressor type of mindset, which is now becoming evident in our society. If you look at like college campus, everything, it's already there. It's like what Bo said earlier, it's mainstream. So while I agree that I would think you have the moral legitimacy in this argument, I think it's important to understand that these people don't see it that way, and that no way of like convincing them through reason is going to change anything.
Well, I mean, I think that there'll always be people who are so wrong that they are willing to commit violence in defense of their wrongness. The issue is when they're motivated by legitimate injustice, the answer is always to address that legitimate injustice as well as to address the injustice that they use in defense of it. If you want to prevent further injustice, responsive injustice, then prevent both injustices, right? Or respond to both injustices. We have to, in fact, start. I don't know. It's been quite a long time, I guess. We have to, in fact, start arresting and imprisoning cops right away. Why is it today? Do you guys see the one today where the guy was an assistant of an autistic man? He was a black guy. He was the behavioral assistant. He was the behavioral assistant of an autistic person. And some moron called the cops apparently and said there's a guy wandering around with a gun. Well, he wasn't wandering around with a gun. He had a toy truck. He was autistic. He was mentally retarded. He was doing autistic shit, like going like stimming with it and stuff, And the guy who got shot, he was his assistant, and he's lying on the fucking ground with his hands in the air, saying, "I am unarmed. This guy has a toy truck. It is not a gun. Do not shoot me. There's no reason for you to have your firearms out, officers. This is an autistic individual. I'm a behavioral aide with this place." And the cops fucking shot him.
Wait, what? I'm gonna look this stuff. I didn't know about this. What's it? What? Where would it happen at?
Type police autistic behavior aid or something like that. If you just type in police into Google News, it's like the second story about police.
I found that police under rifle fire in Columbus, Ohio, 2 hours ago. I'm telling you, man, this is like, yeah, that's the thing. Like, okay, these stories are popping up like crazy, like from both sides. Like, we're gonna see like some real warfare going on if something doesn't change,
All right, well, I'm going to take Bo's implicit advice there and say, why don't we draw this one to a close? We got on to police violence as a subject, which is a little bit different than a negative rights subject, which is kind of a nice change of pace.
Oh, I found it. It's in Florida.
All right, let's talk about this one first here before we end this one then.
Let's see. So...
Or do you want a separate video about this particular instance? Let's do another video on this. Let's do a part 2 of this or a separate video.
Okay, all right, in this real quick, don't start the next one yet, though. I'm going to watch the video and take a piss before we do it, so I have an idea of what to do. I'll link it to
Thanks for watching Talk with Famous People.